key word that's missing is oxygen. So we don't actually know why this is happening. They've talked about what happens when he plays in the match, but not about why, nothing to do with the lack of oxygen causing these things to happen. So that's why it's only worth 1 mark. Question 15 was answered really well by most people. So this gives you a bit of choice in this question here. So you're choosing a sporting activity and describing how it can be adapted so that an athlete with a disability can take part. So in the mark scheme it gives some examples, and these examples were used by most people, but it says a suitable example underneath. So if you came up with a different example to one on this list, you could still get credit for it. It just gives some examples in the mark scheme. So it talks about things like equipment being adapted, here, here, here. Okay, we're also talking about rules being adapted. So double dribble, 2 bounce, guide runners. Okay, so there's lots of different ways that you could adapt activities to make it more suitable for either someone in a wheelchair, someone who's blind, or someone with another disability. Let's have a look at some examples. Right, this answer was definitely one of the best examples from your papers. So they've given their sporting activity of tennis, specifically wheelchair tennis, and then they've talked about the adaptation. So they've firstly talked about a rule adaptation, so the ball can bounce twice, and they've gone on to explain why that is, give them more chance to get to the ball. So 1 mark picked up there. Then they've mentioned an equipment adaptation, so an anti-tip bar on the wheelchair, less likely to fall, which is very useful in a sporting situation where they're moving around fast and changing direction all the time. So a really strong answer there, easily picking up 2 marks. Right, here we have an example of an answer that just picked up the 1 out of 2. So if we have a look at why. So they've started off talking about disability ramps and toilets here, which that's true, they would need to be in the location, but that's not to do with the activity, that's to do with the facilities. So that wouldn't pick up any marks. We've then got the nets can be lowered, so that would pick up a mark, because that's to do with the equipment being adapted, that would pick up that mark. Right, question 16, talking about gender and the differences between men and women. So if we look in the question 2, so you've got to mention 2 things. Physical, so it's got to be to do with the body, differences between men and women. Explain, so it's important you give lots of detail, how these could affect sporting performance. Okay, so looking down the list, we've got 5 things bullet pointed. There are actually more, and you could have got credit for some others as well, because there's no mention on there of speed. There's no mention on there of balance. There's no mention on there of power. Okay, so all those things could have also picked up marks. So in each part of the mark scheme, it tells you an example of something that is a difference. So for example, flexibility, and which gender is generally more flexible. So with flexibility, it's women. Same underneath, strength, same, men have greater strength underneath. Then we're looking at explaining how it could affect performance. So it might talk about a specific sport that they're going to be more suited to, and why that is, because they can perform the movements in that sport easier. So a good example here, so for strength, perform better in strength-based sports, and then it gives examples of rugby weightlifting. So a bit more detail, able to lift more weight, or lift others, or push harder, or throw further. So that's the kind of thing we're looking for to pick up the 4 marks in this question. Right, a really good example here of an answer to this question. So straight away, men are generally stronger than women, 1 mark, no problems. And then they've gone on to give a lot more detail about why that is. So in strength-based sports, they will be more able to use this in a sport such as rugby. They'll be able to tackle a player more effectively. So definitely picking up a mark there, because they've mentioned a sport, they've mentioned strength-based sports, and they've actually given a specific example of the tackle as a situation when a man would be at an advantage. Okay. Then the second point they've made is about flexibility and talking about women being more flexible. That picks up the 3rd mark. And then they've gone on to describe a situation where a woman would be at an advantage. So in a competition, they'll be able to get a higher score. I think in here they have meant to stick gymnastics, so we'll put that in there. I gave them the benefit of the doubt on that one. Higher score, movements and stretches such as the splits will be more accurate, more likely to win. A really thorough answer. Just a shame that they missed out the word gymnastics, but I did give them the benefit of the doubt. So 4 marks on that. Right, second example, picked up just 2 out of the 4 marks. So if you look at the question at the top, you can see where I've underlined on the test paper, which gives you a clue as to where they might have gone wrong. So we do have 2 physical differences mentioned. We've got a physique difference here, wider shoulders, wider hips for women. And then they have mentioned power and strength sports. However, they haven't given a specific example, such as rugby or weightlifting. So only 1 mark for that first point. And then women more suited to balance. So picking up the 2nd mark there. Again, they carry on talking a bit about physique. And then they've actually given a 3rd physical difference, even though the question only asked for 2. So we actually have 3 physical differences mentioned in this answer, but we can't pick up another mark because it only asks for 2. So the 4th mark is missed because this person hasn't given a good explanation of why either balance or flexibility could affect sporting performance in men and women. Right, question 17, talking about risk. So the first part of the question is a definition. What is meant by the term risk? So the official definition is here for 1 mark. Some variations of that definition, I still gave you a mark. I might have given half marks as well for something that was half right. As I mentioned before, with definitions, you just need to learn them. Get them on pieces of paper or cue cards somewhere in your house, in your bedroom, somewhere where you'll see them regularly, so that you'll hopefully start to remember them and they'll go in and stay in. The second part of the question, part B, gives you an example of a high-risk activity, rock climbing. So we're looking here for 2 reasons why someone might enjoy rock climbing, even though it's risky. So you have to do 2 reasons. So most people, in fact I think probably everybody, picked up 1 mark for talking about an adrenaline rush because of the risk. So that was good. And then we've got a selection of points that you could have picked from to get your 2nd mark. So we've got to do with challenge. Quite a few people picked up a mark to do with challenge. Appreciation of the natural environment could get you another mark. And then talking about individual sports instead of team sports could have got you a mark as well. So here's a really good example of a full mark answer worth 2 marks. Adrenaline rush picks up the mark, just be careful of the spelling, but it doesn't matter for this question really. Still pick up the mark. Next part, talking about nature, which would pick up a mark, and we've also got challenge, which would also pick up a mark. So they've made 3 points there, so we can pick 2 out of the 3. We can't give any credit for the 3rd point, but they've covered their back and put 3 points just in case one of them isn't correct. So we picked up 2. Good answer. Right, question 18. Generally, I was really impressed with how well you answered this question. It was a topic that I think people found interesting. So you seem to have taken the information on and remembered things well, and possibly crossed over with what you might have learned in respect to lessons as well. So I'm glad that a lot of people answered this question very well. So if we look at the question, it mentions examples, so you have to use examples. Explain, so we want detail, the effects that culture and religion can have on sports participation and performance. So we're not just talking about how it might affect how fast someone can run or how well someone can play. We're also talking about if it affects whether they even take part in the first place and how often they take part. So if you look down, we've got 4 bullet points splitting up the possible reasons that people could have talked about. So we've got things to do with clothing at the top, specifically examples of a hijab or a crucifix necklace, talking about whether rules will allow it and whether it may affect performance because of restricting movement or affecting aerodynamics. The second part, talking about gender separation, which we've read about, which we've learnt about in Islam. We've then got holy days or times of worship, so there might be specific times when people are not able to commit to taking part in sport because of their religious commitments, and possibly not able to take their performance to a higher level because of when that sporting event might take place. And then finally we've talked about religious fasting, so we have talked about Ramadan as an example of that, leading to a lack of energy or being unable to perform at your best. So let's look at some example answers. I've got 2 really strong answers to show you here. So the first one starts off talking about the religion of Christianity and the special day or holy days being a Sunday. So pick up a mark straight away. They've gone on to explain that point further. Why is that a problem? Because they won't be able to train on a Sunday or play, which means they won't participate as often and their performance won't improve. So talks about effect on performance there. Then changing over to look at Muslims. So talked about covering the body, wearing a hijab. So they've given an example. Remember, it asks for examples. So they've given an example of a religion and an example of a piece of clothing. And then might that be a problem? Might get in their way, cause them to overheat. Really good point. Putting them off participation. Absolutely. So first point talked about performance. Second point talked about participation. Could get in their way, slowing down their performance. So again, going back to the performance. So only actually mentioning 2 of the points. So the holy days up here and the clothing down here, covering the body. But they've explained both those points thoroughly, so that's enough to pick up 5 marks. Another very good answer, very thorough this one. So starting off talking about the hijab, loose-fitting piece of clothing, have to wear to obey religion. Yeah, correct, 1 mark given there. And then they've gone on to give a situation and how it might affect. So if a woman was running in a 100-metre race, hijab could get in the way, slow her down. Okay, and they've actually given an example here of someone that we read about, Sarah Atta, and one of the articles we looked at was about her in our lesson. Next part to do with fasting. So we've got an example of somebody fasting on the lead up to a competition. So won't have all the nutrition and energy to perform at their best. Okay, yeah, that's good. So 4th mark picked up there. Then finally moving on to talk about religious holidays or rest days. That picks up a mark. Not allowed to do anything physical. If a competition was on a Sunday, they might not be able to compete. So picking up the mark there. So 5 marks, a really strong, thorough answer there. Well done. Question 19, this one talking about challenge. So challenge is something that we didn't spend loads of time on in lessons because there's not too much you can be asked about relating to challenge. But this is an example of a question, something similar could come up. So in the question, using a sporting example, that's a key part of the question. Explain, looking for detail and reasons why. Why someone may wish to increase the level of challenge within an activity.